For over a decade, our Gator XP adhesive has been the go-to choice for contractors for all concrete hardscape applications. Mike, it's quickly emerging for the artificial turf space as well.
Yep, the Gator XP adhesive is a fantastic option for seaming your artificial turf. And we're going to go over 4 key benefits to that XP adhesive in those turf applications.
But before we do that, let's take a look at some of the alternatives to understand why XP is the best. The first option we're going to touch on is a peel and stick tape. Mike, this is just a quick tape, 6 inches wide, not a very big bite.
No, it's actually an adhesive tape, and it's not going to work to hold your turf together. If you take a look at what we have here, you would actually peel off that plastic layer and stick your turf onto the adhesive there. Unfortunately, it really doesn't hold very well. You can see how easily this turf just peels away from that tape, right? So we're not going to have a long-term bond.
Definitely not a long-term bond, not an option I would use as a professional contractor.
I don't think anybody should really use this.
We showed you why the tape is not the greatest option. The product of choice is really a polyurethane glue. There are some out there that have some drawbacks though. Let's take a look at some of those, Mike. What's the first one we have?
All right, so the first one we have is this squeeze tube of polyurethane glue. It's got a relatively low viscosity.
So what's that mean?
Well, it's got a consistency kind of between maybe honey and maple syrup, depending on the temperature.
Okay.
So as we squeeze this out, squeezes out pretty easily, nice and easy to apply. We get a nice S pattern without crossing that center line like we like.
Looks clean and simple.
It does, but it's not very thick right now, and it's going to get thinner. It's going to start to spread out pretty quickly.
So as it spreads out, what's the problem with that?
Well, we don't have any height to that adhesive, right? So we're not going to coat the back of the turf very well. We're only going to hit the ridges, not the valleys in between those stitch lines.
Right.
You don't coat the entire back of the turf, you're not going to have a very strong bond.
Sure. So what we want is a higher viscosity, a thicker product more or less. Let's take a look at one of those options. Mike, that's what comes in a bucket here.
Right. So when we think of seaming artificial turf and an artificial turf adhesive, many of us think of a giant bucket of adhesive because that's what's traditionally been used.
Sure. And this here, it's definitely nice and thick, Mike.
It is a thicker material, so yeah, I think that'll coat the back of our turf better, but it looks like you're making a mess here, George. You getting over the center line there?
Yes.
That might squeeze up in between our turf and we can track it all over the place.
Very problematic. Didn't get a nice clean coating there, and like you said, dangerously close to that center line. You never want to cross that center line with your adhesive. As you squeeze through the turf, you end up with a lot of problems.
Right. The other thing you have to consider is that that's a big bucket of glue.
For sure.
If you're doing maybe a 20-foot or 30-foot seam in a residential backyard, you don't need nearly that amount of glue. So being a moisture cure polyurethane, it starts to harden as soon as you open the lid. It's quite possible that you go to use that a couple months later and it's hard as a rock.
Yeah, and that means a lot of waste, which never any good on a project for a professional hardscape contractor. So Mike, the product of choice is clearly the XP glue. Let's take a look at that and talk about the 4 benefits of why that's the best.
All right, so you have the XP adhesive. That's a polyurethane adhesive. Hey, used for concrete block all the time, and it's used for turf all the time now because it really is the best option. As I do my nice S pattern here, you can see that that is a very thick bead of adhesive there, right?
Absolutely is, and that's that first benefit, that high viscosity. It's a thick bead of glue. Mike, there's some good benefit in that.
Right, now we're gonna coat the entire back of that turf, right? We're gonna hit the ridges and the valleys, getting superior bond strength compared to that thinner viscosity adhesive.
And superior bond strength, that's definitely what you want to hold that seam permanently with that Gator turf warranty of 20 years. Mike, I also noticed pretty easy to use.
Right, that came out of that cartridge very easily, right? 10 and 28 ounce cartridge, we have great control over it, and there's really no waste, right?
Perfect.
Smaller package size, you're going to be able to do that seam. Hey, you could use that adhesive on your next hardscape project if you had some extra. Great option for seaming your artificial turf. In fact, it's so strong that the turf itself starts to tear apart before the bond between the seam tape and the backing fails.
And that's pretty powerful. What you're seeing there is how strong that bond is compared to the turf, like you said, actually pulling apart the turf itself before that seam breaks down.
So when you want to think about seaming artificial turf, think about XP adhesive.